Did you have your orange juice this morning? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I didn't. I had a glass of milk, but when we think about orange juice, a lot of it is made from concentrate. All the kind we had growing up was made from concentrate. You know what that is? That's when your mom takes this can of stuff and throws it in this pitcher and puts water on it, and all of a sudden it's orange juice. They take and they condense and squish and put in the most compact form this orange that used to be growing on a tree so that you can have juice. And when you think about it, coffee's kind of like that, right? You take this whole tree and it produces this bean, and you put this bean in some water after you squish it up and grind it, and it makes coffee. Maybe you had coffee this morning. You take milk. Milk came from a whole cow, and it's condensed to just this wonderful, wonderful white liquid that made those little donut holes that were left over go down so wonderfully this morning. We were at PTP last month, and B.J. Clark said something that made me think about orange juice. He was up there preaching, and you've heard B.J., he does a marvelous job. And I don't even remember what passage he was talking about, but he said, this is the gospel in a nutshell. He said the whole thing could be found in this one passage, and I said, It's like you concentrated the whole gospel into just one little drop, and we can get so much out of that. And immediately there popped up a lot of verses in my head where that was the case. And you think about concentrating something. When we're little, sometimes we take a magnifying glass out in the yard and we try to make fires or burn things. You take the sun that's shining over this whole half of a planet and you concentrate it into a spot this big. What happens when we take a look at a spot in the Gospels where everything is concentrated, where all the truths that are found inside all of those wonderful books and letters can be found in one little spot? That's what I hope that we can do this morning. But as we look at concentrated Christianity, the first verse I want us to look at, the first verse that popped into my head when I heard him say, this is the gospel in a nutshell, is Matthew 22, 37 through 40. It can also be found in Mark chapter 12. But Jesus said unto him, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and with all thy mind. Mark's account has strength. He says, this is the first great commandment. The second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And the last part of verse 40 here is the reason I thought of this. On these two commandments hang, or these two commands support all the law and the prophets. Jesus says, in a couple of sentences here, this is the entirety of the Old Testament. Now let's look at the context of this. We don't want to just take one verse and say, well, here's the gospel. We want to put it in its context, or we want to see how that it condenses everything appropriately. See, the Pharisees there, if you continue reading Matthew chapter 22 and you back up in the chapter, the Pharisees sought to trick him in a question. They asked Jesus, what's the greatest command? Knowing, now quote unquote, knowing there is no right answer. No matter which one you give, no command is greater than any other. But they didn't realize they were asking Christ, the Son of God, about this, and he had the correct answer. Well, what's the greatest command? Well, love God with everything that you have. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. And they just kind of stood there with their heads kind of sideways looking at Jesus. And what could you do? He had answered the question correctly. They tried to bait him on it. And it kind of backfired. How could this one little bitty passage be the concentrate of all the Old Testament and have so much importance for us even today? Let's take a minute and look at that. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and in Mark chapter 12, all thy strength. Let's talk about that shall. It's not a command, or it's not a question. It's not a statement, it is a command. You are going to love, agape, sacrificially give yourself over in every single aspect over to loving God. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy heart. Now, the Greeks thought of things differently than we do. When we say heart, that's our seat of emotion, right? That's where our feelings come from. Well, the Greeks, the Hebrews, those folks in the first century, that's the soul. The heart is where all your kind of determination, your physical aspect go. That's your body. That's where you physically demonstrate. In everything I do physically, it will show my love for my God. Think about a relationship, right? We're told to love God. How do you love your spouse? I brought Laura Beth some flowers the other day. I'd give her chocolates, but then I'd be the one eating all of them. I send her cards, right? I take her out on a date. These things I physically do to show her that I love her. What do we do to God physically to show Him that we love Him? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, everything we do. Hopefully we came here this morning because we love God and we want to show God that we love Him and we're here to worship Him. And we evangelize because we love God. I want to go and to show other people how much I love God. Everything we do physically, just like buying flowers or cards or whatever, those things physically demonstrate our love. We need to physically demonstrate our love for God, everything that we do. With all thy soul. Now, this is the emotional aspect of it. Feeling in love with God. Now, we're not saying that all of Christianity is just feeling emotionally invested in God. You have to work to feel in love with someone. What does it mean and what is it like to be emotionally in love with somebody? When your phone rings and you see your wife's number. Now, you back up a little bit. When Laura Beth and I first started dating, there were no cell phones. Now, some people think that's normal, that everybody on this side of the room goes, I could not look at my phone and say, oh, hey, Laura Beth's calling. Now I can, and it's nice, and my pulse quickens. My sister used to answer the phone, and Josh, Laura Beth's on the phone. I got excited. My girlfriend's calling. My pulse would quicken. I would daydream about Laura Beth, about where we were going to go for a date or where I should take her, those kind of things. I would communicate with her frequently. Eventually, we got to the point in time where I could send her text. But I'd leave her cards in her locker. I'd communicate with her because I was emotionally invested in this. What are we doing emotionally to show God that we love Him? Do we communicate with Him regularly? Are we excited? Do you wake up on Sunday morning and go, I get to go to church today? Now I realize it's early on a Sunday morning. You could be sleeping in and we're glad that you're here. But do you have that same kind of excitement? What will you do with that same kind of excitement? If you're emotionally invested in someone, you tell the world about it. Do we do the same thing with God? Love the Lord thy God with all of thy mind. This is the intellectual part of loving God. There's an old poem that just goes, I love thee, let me count the ways. This is why I love you. I know this in my head. I love you because of this and because of this. Do we know why we love God? Do we study His Word? Are we engaged in developing our mind and putting our mind towards spiritual things? And think about it for a minute. Whether good or bad, yesterday we put our mind, some of us did, into college football. It didn't turn out too well for Tennessee, but I think Mizzou won, so I guess everybody's happy. We put our mind and our attention into that. Do we put our mind into spiritual things? Mark includes strength. Love the Lord thy God with all thy strength. This is your might, your force, your will. This is the part of you that makes you steadfast and patient and faithful. If you have a relationship, you are faithful in that relationship. Your strength keeps you faithful to God. With that in mind, let's back up and say, why is this the entirety of the Old Testament? If we love God with all of our physical, emotional, intellectual, and will point perspectives, will we do everything that was contained as a Jew? Would we have done everything in the Old Testament? Would we have put Him first? Would we have set aside the Sabbath day? Would we have given our sacrifices and tithes and offerings? If I love my wife this way, there is nothing of mine that she will not have. Now let's forward this, hit the fast forward button and bring this to the New Testament. If I love God with all of my heart, my physical aspect, and my emotions, and my intellect, and my willpower, I'll be where He wants me to be, and I will do everything that He tells me to do. Everything there is to be godly, I will do because I love God that much. Whatever my wife needs me to do, I promise I really try to do because I love her. When we have that same kind of selfless, sacrificial love for God, where everything I do physically demonstrates my love for God, my obedience to the gospel, my faithfully living after Him, my evangelizing to other folks, I do that because I love God and I want them to come into the same relationship that I have with Him, to helping folks wherever help is needed, and works of benevolence, encouraging and building up other Christians, even when they're in trouble, even when they're in sin. All of those things we do because we love God. Is this concentrated Christianity? Oh, I really think it is. Look at the second part. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Again, you will. You are going to love your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? Everybody look around. We're all neighbors. Everybody walk out. Not right now. Not right now. But when you have a chance, when you walk outside, look over in that Walmart parking lot and the Kohl's across the interstate, everybody getting ready to eat lunch in Texas, those are your neighbors. When you drive home, look at all the houses on both sides of the road, those are your neighbors. When you get home, get on the internet and pull up Google Maps and look at the state of Missouri. Those folks are your neighbors. Look at Google Earth. Spin it around, look at all the people on the globe. Those are your neighbors. Love them like you do yourself. Will you ever have any irreconcilable differences? You will have differences. But will you ever have any irreconcilable differences with anybody else as you love them as yourself? Nope. Will you be the Christian that God wants you to be? Will you be the husband, the father, the son, the daughter, the mother, the aunt, the uncle, the friend, the worker, the employee, the employer that God wants you to be if you treat everybody the way you treat yourself? Well, I think you will. I don't think if you love God with everything that you have and you love everybody else the way you love yourself, well, I think the world would be a lot different place. Jesus said this is, if you wanted the cliff notes of the Old Testament, Jesus gives it to you right here. Love God with every ounce of your being and love everybody as yourself. But how do you love everybody as yourself? Well, that brings us to the next verse I want to look at. Matthew 7 and verse 12. Therefore, all these things whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, even so do them. Notice what he says, for this is the law and the prophets. He takes that statement he made there in Matthew 22 and he kind of shrinks it down even more. This is the law and the prophets. What's the context? Sermon on the Mount. And this particular section on the Sermon on the Mount is talking about God's gifts. Knock, and the door shall be opened. Ask, you shall receive. And he goes on talking about, now, if you ask of your father a fish, would he give you a serpent? Even so, your father, if you ask, he's going to get. With that in mind, he says, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, the same do also to them. If you ask of God something, He's going to help you. You're not going to ask of something you need and Him giving you something you don't. You're not going to ask of a fish and you get a serpent instead. It's in that context, therefore, because we have this gracious, benevolent picture of God in our minds, with that in mind, whatsoever you would that men should do to you. Now, as we stop and look at this, we want to keep one thing in mind. This is not about others. This verse is about you. This verse is about you. It's not about what anybody else is doing to you or how they're treating you. This is how you treat other folks. Now, with that in mind, how should other people treat you? Well, if they read their Bible right, they'd love you even as they love themselves. Back up to Matthew 22. In a perfect world, everybody treats everybody the way they want to be treated. But we don't live in a perfect world. I know how I should be treated. I know how people ought to behave toward me. And guess what, folks? That's the way I have to treat them. I know that this is how this should work. Well, I'm the one that make it work that way, because this verse is about me. This verse is about you. And it's about the way we treat each other. Think about it. This is the golden rule, and we've all seen it, but we don't always live it. Whatsoever you would that men should do to you. Don't treat people the way you are treated or the way you think you should be, but however men should actually treat you. Sometimes we want more favor for ourselves than we're due, and sometimes we abase ourselves more than we ought to. However we should be treated by others is the way that we should treat others also. You do this. We just talked about loving our neighbor as ourselves. How do we love them? We treat them the way they should treat others. We treat them the way that God would have them do. This is how we love our neighbors as ourselves. This is how we love our enemies. This is how we act like Christ. This is how we let our light shine. This is how we become a city that is set upon a hill. As someone who is in the world, should somebody share the gospel with me? Yeah, so what am I going to do? I'm going to share the gospel with somebody. As an erring brother or sister in Christ, should somebody come to try to reclaim me? Yeah, so what am I going to do? I'm going to reach out. When somebody's broken down, we see it in the bulletin all the time. There are people today who are hurting. Should somebody reach out to them? Yeah, they should. Guess what? We need to. That's us. That's you. That's me. This verse deals with me. It deals with you. Well, somebody ought to do that. Well, guess what? That is us. Thought it was interesting. This past week was September the 11th. Saw a video on Facebook. That's where you see all good things, I guess, and all bad things. But it was about the great boat lift of September the 11th. Never even heard about it. Maybe you saw it when I shared it. But I guess as the buildings were being bombarded and as they came collapsing, everybody fled south, running away from the World Trade Center. And they got up to the seawall where the river was at, and they found out that Manhattan really is an island and there was nowhere to go. There was one ferry and a Coast Guard vessel that was trying to get what ended up being 500,000 people out of the lower Manhattan. The Coast Guard made one phone call. Well, they got on the radio. Anybody who can help with the evacuation of lower Manhattan, meet at Governor's Island. 500,000 people were evacuated in 9 hours because everybody with a boat was there. Why? Because somebody should do this. I would want somebody to do this for me. Whatsoever you would, somebody needs to be there to evacuate these people, and somebody was. Because that day in this country, people obeyed the golden rule. The largest maritime evacuation of any people ever happened on September the 11th, and I didn't even know about it until 2 days ago. Because somebody did what they should have done, what they would have wanted somebody to do for them. And I thought it was interesting, and everybody's got these real thick Bronklyn and New York accents, and he said that was the thing to do. It was the right thing to do. How could you not do that? I wish we could take that and carry it with us every single day. And remember that in this verse is the whole gospel. Not just the law and the prophets, but the Bible. If we treated everybody this way, because this is the way that God would have us to treat everyone, think about the difference this world would be in. Concentrated Christianity, this verse is about me. It's about you and how we treat others, doing what should be done. Last verse I want us to look at is the verse we started with this morning, James 1:27. When we talk about concentrate, whether or not it looked at that stuff my mama put in the picture was pure orange, right? And you add water and it becomes juice. It is pure. It is concentrate. This is one of those verses that immediately popped to my mind. Pure religion. Pure, sweet, condensed, concentrated religion. If you had to boil it all down to this, right? Boil it all down is another way to say concentrated. If you had to boil all the New Testament down to this, James said, it is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and to keep yourself unspotted from the world. Now, again, we want context. We don't want to just take a verse and say, well, this is the Bible, don't worry about the rest. Context is very important. Verses 20 or so down through about 26, he is talking about vain religion. Vain religion dealing with all this lip service. It's a whole lot of words and not a lot of action. It's doing as I say, not doing as I do. This man's religion is vain, but he said in verse 27, pure religion. There is this clear contrast between worthless religion and worship and true, faithful religion and worship. And this is what he says. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. That word visit means to look upon in order to help, to benefit, look after, to take care of, and provide for. To visit, look in, to take care of the needs of the fatherless and the widows. Now, are there other people in the world who need help besides just the fatherless and the widows? Yeah. But remember, this is condensed, right? Pure. I'll go take care of something over here because they're going to give me a little bit of money if I help them. Or, I'll go help Sister so-and-so rake her yard because I know she's going to bake this really big apple pie and send home with me. Sometimes we help because there's some sort of reward in it. Well, I don't want anything, but I know they're going to give me a little. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being paid or recompensed for what we do. But when he says visit the fatherless and the widows, those are people who cannot give you anything. Those are folks you help simply because you're helping. We go back to that Good Samaritan. Is he going to be rewarded for anything that he did? He helped that guy out of the goodness of his own heart, right? He spent his own time and his own effort and his own money on that individual who was on the side of the road half dead. Not to gain anything, but simply to be what we call today a Good Samaritan. Pure religion is helping others who cannot help themselves and who cannot help you in return. I'm not going to go visit the fatherless so they put my name on a plaque. I'm not going to go visit the widows so they give me their last of their money. No, I'm just going to do this because this is what I do. Why is it what I do? Because I'm a Christian. That word visit means to look into in order to help. That means you are presented with this situation. Sister so-and-so is, she's got nobody else to look to, and this is what's going on. You're presented. You prepare a plan to give them provision for whatever it is they need. Oftentimes we see visit and we think, what's that mean? Well, hey, sister so-and-so, hey, brother so-and-so, I'm just here to check on you. And you sit on their couch for 10 minutes and you leave. And then you go about your way. That's a visit, right? I just came by to talk. When James says visit, you come by to work. What do you need? You don't take no for an answer. You walk in and this elderly sister's got dishes in the sink and you know she has, you just get up and do her dishes. You go to Brother So-and-so's house and he's raking leaves for 2 minutes at a time because that's all he can stand up. You go and you get to rake and you rake his yard. You see him in a tough spot and you help him out, whatever it is, in their afflictions, their troubles, their trials, their tribulations. You go and visit them when they're down and out, and you help them get up. It's not just, remember, this is a contrast between vain worship and true worship. If I am doing my part as a Christian, it is action. It's not just going, well, I hope things work out for you. It's going, working things out for them. There's a difference, and we can be about it. To take care of the needs of others. And then we get to the second part. To keep himself unspotted from the world. My mama opened up that can and put that stuff in the jug, and it was orange. But now what happens if there was a bunch of cherry in there? Well, it wouldn't be orange juice anymore. There'd be something else in there with it. In order to be orange juice, it has to be pure 100% concentrate Florida oranges, right? That's what it says on the can. If there's anything else in there, it is no longer pure. It is somebody's job at the factory to make sure nothing else gets in that can of orange concentrate. So that when it gets to my house, it is a beautiful can of what will be orange juice. It is my job to make sure there is nothing gets in my soul, in my heart or my mind, that would contaminate me so that I cannot get to heaven. To keep, that word keep is a military term used for guarding or watching something, which is one of the most difficult jobs to do. A guard, someone who is on the watch, has hours and hours or days or weeks of just boredom, monotony that wears you down. And unexpectedly something happens. And you go from hours of boredom to minutes of sheer terror and adrenaline. We are to keep ourselves unspotted, to maintain our pure, concentrated essence of Christ. We're all baptized into Christ, right? We put on Christ. It's our job to keep Him unspotted, to make sure that garment is solidly white as snow. Sometimes things happen. We walk in the light, we wander astray, we have to come back. We repent of those things. We do our best to walk in the light. But whereas this vain man's worship is all lip service and talk and not action, we have to keep, watch, guard so that the world doesn't get into us. I believe James is right when he calls this pure religion. Why? Because I'm doing the will of God. I'm being a faithful, active, obedient Christian when these things are accomplished. And if I am keeping myself unspotted from the world, that means I'm talking to God the way that I need to, that I'm listening and reading and studying His Word so that I know what will spot my garment. It means I've been obedient to the gospel of Christ. It means I'm not committing sin. Think about all the things that are implied when you keep yourself unspotted from the world, when you're actively helping those who God would have you to help. Think about it for a minute as we concentrate here on Christianity. The gospel is for all. It's for everybody. If you love God, you want to do what He wants you to. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Do you love God with everything that you have this morning? With all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength? If you love God and for whatever reason you haven't been obedient to the gospel, you have to be obedient to the gospel. You have to put on Christ in baptism, having confessed His name and repented of sins and believed in Him. You start down this process. I love God. God, what can I do to follow after you, to follow after Christ, to be obedient to your will. Jesus said, love me, keep my commandments. If you love somebody, you'll do anything for them. God wants you to obey His gospel. If you love Him, have you done that? If not, we can make that right this morning. Have you lived faithfully for Christ? Have you visited the fatherless, the widows, your neighbors in their affliction? Have you done to others the way that they should do to you? Have you loved your neighbor as yourself? Have you truly loved God with everything that you have, or have you let something slip? This morning we have an opportunity to make those things right, to come back, to get whatever is contaminating us, whatever sinful contagion is in our life. We have a chance to get it out and once again be pure, concentrated Christians, pure and undefiled before God and the Father. If you have sin, you need to remove it. Then come now as we stand, as we sing.